start this media availability with some challenging news. Just received a briefing from the Minister of Public Safety and his team. There's been a critical incident in Coquitlam involving the RCMP. At this point, we're not in a position to be able to release details. But I can reassure the people of Coquitlam that there is not a further threat to public safety. And we expect to be in a position through the RCMP to share more details soon. So with that, I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Thank you for joining us today. We can begin on the floor here with Richard Sisman from Global News. Go ahead, Richard.
Premier, I understand you can't provide a lot of details of what happened in Coquitlam. Our understanding is an officer may have died here. Can you confirm at least that that is what has happened here, and what sort of work is going to be done now with the province and the community as we grapple through this?
So there's more work that has to be done before any information can be released about this. What I can say is that this is a very serious, critical incident that's taken place in Coquitlam, and as soon as we can share more information, we will, but that the public is not at further risk at this time.
Do you have a follow-up question, Richard?
I do. One of the issues you heard a lot about at UBCM this week is around chronic offenders, the issue of mental health, supporting that. Will you push for chronic offender legislation with regards to bail so people get the help they need before being released?
Well, British Columbians will be familiar with the fact that our province has taken a leadership role with Ontario in pushing the federal government to reform their bail rules to ensure that repeat violent offenders, the repeat offenders are not waiting for trial in community, that they're waiting in custody to ensure the safety of the public. The bill did not pass the last legislative session. It stalled on the order paper, which was very frustrating and had all party support. It should have passed then. The good news is that it's passed the Parliament now. It's headed to the Senate. I'll be headed to Ottawa with colleagues to press and ensure that it makes it through the Senate as quickly as possible. There will be some meetings with senators because reform is certainly needed in this area and is overdue.
Our next question will come from Justin McElroy from CBC News. Go ahead, Justin.
Hi, Premier. John Horgan liked to say that he didn't like making announcements, funding announcements at UBCM because he thought it was the chance to listen to municipalities throughout the week and didn't feel it was appropriate. You obviously made a number of funding announcements today, particularly around rural BC and the MLAs behind you. Why do you think that was so important to do this week?
Well, I think there are two parts to government, and I absolutely agree with Premier Horgan that a key component is listening. And I think it's also important. There are a lot of local government officials, especially from rural areas, but certainly not exclusively, that need to know that we're not just listening, but we're also taking action. And so for the announcements that we've made today should reflect to them that we're hearing what they're saying about what the needs in their communities are, whether it's about housing, delivering more affordable housing, whether it's about their volunteer firefighters ensuring they have the equipment that they need, or people struggling with a cancer diagnosis, being able to get to treatment and not having to worry about those logistics, being able to get the care they need. It's about demonstrating that we are listening and taking action.
Yeah, we heard a lot this week about housing. We heard your minister repeatedly say, you know what's coming, but I can't say publicly at this point. He also said announcements around short-term rentals will be happening as well. Are you confident at this point that you have more or less the full support or as much support as you're going to get from municipal governments on the changes and edicts that are coming down in the next few months?
There are people, right, as we're talking, who are looking at Craigslist trying to find a place to rent in our province. There are people who are looking at real estate listings and wondering if they'll ever be able to afford a home. This is an urgent matter, the housing crisis, and we are taking the action that is needed. And the thing that I'm really appreciative of in many, many meetings I had with local governments here is their commitment from their level as well an understanding that we need to build housing for a rapidly growing population for the next generation, to give young people a shot, for seniors to be able to stay in the communities that they love. And that I'm finding a growing consensus among between our government, municipal leaders, and the federal government. It's taken a long time to get here, but we've got that consensus now. And part of the announcement today was about supporting those local governments with the resources they need to have the staff to get that housing approved, get it out the door, and get it built for British Columbians urgently. Our agenda on housing is not a secret. There's a published plan around homes for British Columbians, where we're going, what the priority is, what the focus will be, and we're implementing that plan. And it's an ambitious housing agenda this fall, where we'll require the support of local governments, where we're going to take action on short-term rentals and open housing for people that's available today. And we've got a lot more to do.
Our next question will come from Penny Daflos, CTV News. Go ahead, Penny.
Hi, Premier. I'm just wondering, how did you decide on your priorities for your funding announcements today?
Well, the meetings at UBCM are very informative in terms of what local governments are facing, kind of immediate issues in local communities that don't necessarily rise to the level of getting provincial government attention any other way. But there are some broad themes that come through in these meetings, both in advance and certainly my colleagues behind me from rural communities. So a number of components go into that, but our government's priorities are public safety, which absolutely includes emergency response, housing, making sure that people have a decent place to live, strengthening our healthcare system, and making sure we have a strong economy. The announcements today are in furtherance of all those key goals for British Columbians.
A lot of the issues that delegates discuss with your ministers in these small group meetings have been raised again and again over years. And I think that some delegates are going to leave here a little bit frustrated that there hasn't been sufficient progress or commitment on what they see as fixable problems. What would you say to them?
Well, our government recently announced literally $1 billion that we sent out to local governments so that they could take that money and direct it to local priorities that they saw without restriction, the only accountability to their local voters about how they spend that money. And I think that's necessary. I think we have to trust local governments. I think we have to empower them to be able to solve community issues and give them the resources they need to do that. Just like the announcement that I made today about the $61 million for staff support so they can implement our shared housing agenda and deliver actually affordable homes for British Columbians. I have a strong belief that only through partnership with local government officials are we going to be able to deliver for British Columbians. And I'm hopeful that local governments are seeing that. I've been Premier for 10 months and a few days. And we've got a lot more work to do, but I hope they see the direction we're going. And part of the structure of the Q&A process is that public accountability to those local government officials so they can ask those questions about areas they might feel are neglected.
Our next question will come from Brenna Owen from the Canadian Press. Go ahead.
Thank you, Premier. So responding to the Prime Minister's allegation of Indian involvement in Hardeep Nijjar's killing, you called on Ottawa to share all relevant information related to ongoing foreign interference and also transnational organized crime threats in order to protect people at risk. So that's a pretty specific remark. Were your remarks about transnational organized crime informed by your briefing with CSIS? And if so, what did you hear?
For a while, I've been of the opinion that there is a gap between the information that Ottawa has, the various entities, CSIS, National RCMP, and the ability to communicate that information to provinces where we can actually make a difference in terms of using it to respond to issues on the ground. It started when I was Attorney General on the issue of money laundering. I was incredibly frustrated about the inability of the province to get information from CSIS, from the RCMP nationally about what was happening so we could block the laundering of criminal proceeds of crime like the trafficking of fentanyl, the trafficking of people in our province. And since then, I've been continually pushing the federal government and related agencies to share information with the province about this. This latest incident is just one more example of why we need that information. We can only keep British Columbians safe if we work together. We cannot protect diaspora communities, people who have home connections in other parts of the world from foreign interference if we don't know that it's happening. And for the India announcement, I think for many people of South Asian descent who have connections to India, they've been feeling pressure from India. They've been living the experience of interference from the Indian government in our communities in British Columbia. I suspect strongly that the federal government has information about that through CSIS, through the RCMP, and about how we could respond to that and prevent it. I'm glad to see Dominic LeBlanc has reached out. He said, we want to make sure that you have the information you need to keep British Columbians safe. So we're working on that, but there has not been good information sharing on this. My expectation is on the specific incident of the shooting in Surrey that the priority should be criminal prosecution and protecting that criminal prosecution so people can be held accountable for what happened in Surrey. But on the broad issue of ensuring community members are safe, we got a long way to go to share that information.
Do you have a follow-up, Anna?
Yes, thank you. Two parts. Did CSIS approach you, or did you approach CSIS for that briefing? And in terms of the transnational organized crime, what you said in your statement, what's the point of kind of publicly alluding to that threat, very real threat, and the CSIS briefing, and then being opaque about what you know so far?
Okay, well, it's fairly easy for me to say what I know so far, which is everything that's in the public realm. The only briefings that I've been able to receive from CSIS are what are called open information briefings or open source briefings, which is information that's available to the public doing an internet search, which I find frustrating. And so I can be transparent about that information that I've received. In terms of the specific incident in Surrey, I was contacted by the Prime Minister. He briefed me about what he was going to say in the Parliament, which he then went on and said. He offered to me a briefing from CSIS, which of course I said, yes, I would like that. We arranged it. We got a briefing from the director, which was, as I say, open source information. And then that was it. I expressed my frustration in the meeting with the CSIS director about our inability to get more concrete information about this kind of thing. And I have articulated that to the federal government. I understand there may need to be reform around the act that governs CSIS in order for them to be able to share this information. If that's what's required, let's make it happen. Because the only way that we're going to make traction on this is by the federal government trusting the provincial government with information and being able to act on it in our local communities.
Our next question will come from Fran Yanor from Northern Beat. Go ahead, Fran.
Okay. This question is on upcoming legislation on public drug use in this session. A lot of questions, talking to a lot of communities, they seem to be sort of fall into two camps. Some are waiting to see what's going to be in the legislation to see if there's going to be more restrictions. So they're holding off on their bylaws. Others have forged ahead, as you know. So could you give some indication, is the government considering expanding the restrictions, and will you also facilitate the local solutions that are already being put in place?
I think that local governments are well placed to be able to make determinations about what's required for community safety in their communities when it comes to public drug use. And so there's their ability to pass bylaws if that's what they would like to do. They can do that right now. In terms of what we're proposing at the provincial level is to recognize that local governments have limited resources, that they want to focus on a whole array of issues. It's staff time, it's research, it's legal in order to prepare bylaws. And so setting a provincial minimum standard that recognizes what they're seeing in communities to reinforce our provincial belief that if we're funding overdose prevention sites, that people should be directed to use at those sites, not in playgrounds, not in the doorways of businesses, not at bus stops, and make sure that that's very clear, that minimum standard. So if they want to go beyond that, they can and respond to what's happening in their communities, or they can rely on the provincial standards. So we'll be introducing that legislation that goes beyond the Health Canada restrictions that were recently announced. And if it doesn't go quite the full direction that the local government feels is necessary, then they can augment that with their bylaw authorities.
And Fran, do you have a follow-up question?
Thank you. Second question, prevailing concern that I heard from particularly, well, I guess every community, but also the mid to small size communities is, I'm sure you've heard it too, and all your ministers have, is the lack of resources for mental health and addictions. And I know that you have a lot of money coming. I'm wondering, everyone's asking when, where. The North in particular has some projects that they're pitching. Often it goes to Prince George. It's still many hours away for a lot of people up there. Can you maybe give some indication where these 3 areas of expansion will be for redfish, or can you give these communities some hope that there's something coming?
We're working with communities across the province, including in rural areas, to ensure that people have access to treatment and detox. So, for example, there's a very concrete proposal around detox in the Terrace area that's being advanced by Indigenous leadership and local leadership in the Terrace area, recognizing a gap in the services there that is hugely needed. We're engaged directly with them around supporting that proposal. There are proposals across BC that are coming forward. CMHC has put out a call for treatment beds that are funded through our provincial funding. And they're working on that with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction. I look forward to having more to share. The urgency around this is certainly present in our government, in local governments, and in communities. People want more treatment. The big challenge for us is the staff to be able to deliver that. So we're also working on training up the people to have the skills and looking at exactly what skills we need people to have so that we can stretch those resources like the addictions doctors and the psychiatric nurses and the social workers with people with slightly lower qualifications, but still able to do that work and really help expand the number of beds we're able to open and the support we're able to give.
Our next question will come from Wolf Deppner from Black Press. Go ahead, Wolf.
Thank you. Excuse me, Premier. What was your reaction to the speech of Minister Wilkinson? He promised additional support from the federal government when it comes to housing. He didn't specify those. But then he also threw the ball sort of back into your court when your government has been calling on the federal government to do more, to play a bigger part in housing. What was your reaction to this promise of more support, but also, hey, you also need to do your bit?
Well, I think if you're looking for a home right now, you can't afford it. The last thing you want to hear is 2 levels of government bickering back and forth about whose job it is. The province of BC is not waiting for the federal government. We're taking action. We're working with local governments. We're changing our laws. We're addressing short-term rentals. We're putting literally billions into housing. We're using public land to build more affordable housing. What we're trying to do is set an example. Here are opportunities for Ottawa to get involved. Here's a chance for you to amplify what we're doing by leveraging your programs and by allocating resources to BC. We're a good partner. We are putting huge money into housing, huge resources into housing to address this issue. And if the federal government comes along, we can do so much more. That'll be part of our key message when we visit Ottawa shortly. And if they want to show leadership on housing, BC is the place to really get that in the ground and show people what they mean when they say they want to show leadership.
And Wolf, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. Earlier in your speech, you said that rural British Columbia needs a lens, that your government needs to put a lens on rural British Columbia. How much of an acknowledgement was that your government has perhaps not done that?
Well, the critique from rural communities is that governments of all stripes have failed to do this consistently, that they feel that programs are designed in Victoria consistently over generations that fail to understand and incorporate the unique needs of rural communities. And the goal we have is of not being defensive about that, saying, okay, how do we make sure that we're delivering in this way? That's what our rural vision's about. That's why the rural MLAs, our rural caucus, are standing behind me here today, is because I think we can ensure and we can do a better job than previous governments have of delivering for rural communities. And I look forward to proving that, because that really, just saying it isn't sufficient. I think we actually need to show it. And I try to show it with a couple of the announcements that I made during the speech today around volunteer fire departments and around healthcare transportation, 2 key issues for rural communities that keep coming up.
And that's all the time we have today. Thank you very much for joining us.